The old house sat quietly on the edge of Echo Falls, Missouri, its pale blue paint faded and chipped by years of sun and winter wind. Time had softened the lines of its wooden siding and dulled the shine of its tin roof. But the little garden in front, stubborn and loyal, still bloomed every spring with yellow marigolds and creeping vines, tended by the same woman for over 3 decades. Martha Ellison, 72, lived alone in that house. Her days were filled with silence and ritual. Each morning, she woke before the sun, brewed her single cup of black coffee, and stood at the window watching fog roll gently over the fields. Then she would set out 2 plates on the table, crack 2 eggs, toast 2 slices of bread, and lay out cutlery for 2. But only 1 seat was ever occupied. 15 years had passed since her son Jason last walked through the front door. 15 Christmases, Thanksgivings, and birthdays where his absence was more present than anything else. He had left for college in Chicago full of ambition and dreams, promising to visit often. But the visits grew infrequent, then stopped altogether. Phone calls became sparse, eventually fading into silence. Neighbors asked about him with kind voices and pitiful eyes. "He's doing well," Martha would always reply, folding her hands in front of her apron. "Busy life, you know." But she never said the truth, that she hadn't heard his voice in over a decade. Martha never remarried after her husband died in a car accident when Jason was only 6. She had raised her son alone, taking on 2 jobs, teaching at the elementary school by day and cleaning at the community center at night. Her world had once revolved around his laughter, his tantrums, his growing feet and endless questions about everything from dinosaurs to the stars. The silence he left behind had become a part of her. Still, she didn't let the emptiness consume her. Each Wednesday, she volunteered at the town library. On Sundays, she baked lemon bread for the local church sale. And every evening, she sat on the porch swing with a worn-out mystery novel on her lap and a cup of chamomile tea by her side, watching the sun settle behind the maple trees. She told herself she was fine. But every now and then, when she would see a tall young man walking across the grocery store parking lot with dark hair and a strong jawline, she would feel her breath catch. Just for a second. Just in case. And when it wasn't him, she would tell herself again, "He's busy, he'll come when he can." The truth was, Martha had prepared for his return 1,000 times in her mind. What she would say. How she would smile and act surprised but not too emotional. She imagined hugging him tightly, her hand pressing the back of his head like when he was a child, whispering, "You're home." But it never happened. Until the 2nd Friday of December. It had been a cold day, unusually gray and windy. Martha had just pulled a tray of molasses cookies from the oven when she heard a car pulling into the driveway. Not the mail truck, not a neighbor's. À Dieppe, un familiar rumble. She peered through the window. A black SUV, sleek, polished, the kind you see in television commercials. Her heart skipped. Then stumbled. She wiped her hands on her apron, her body moving slower than her mind, unsure if she was imagining it. The doorbell rang. Sharp. Twice. When she opened the door, her breath caught in her chest. There he was. Jason. Older. Tiner. His once boyish face now carved with the quiet lines of adulthood. His hair, neatly combed back. A dark coat hugged his broad shoulders, and in one hand he held a leather duffel. In the other, a box of pastries. "Mom," he said, voice breaking on the single word. For a moment, Martha couldn't speak. She blinked hard, tears stinging the corners of her eyes, her mouth slightly ajar as if the very air had been stolen from her lungs. Then she stepped forward and embraced him. She held him tightly, almost afraid he might vanish like all the other dreams. Her thin arms wrapped around his back, and for a moment they stood there, just the 2 of them, alone with years of silence between them. He came inside. She poured him tea. The cookies were still warm. "I'm sorry," he said after the 2nd cup. "Ich should come back sooner." She nodded but didn't press. She looked at his face, his hands, his tired eyes, and decided it was enough that he was here. They sat for hours, catching up on fragments. He told her about a startup he had launched, how it failed. He spoke of big cities, of jobs that paid well but never felt like home. And eventually his voice lowered, almost ashamed, as he admitted he'd lost his apartment a few months ago and had been drifting. "But I wanted to come home," he said. "I couldn't think of any place else." That night, Martha made him meatloaf with mashed potatoes and green beans, his favorite. He ate quietly, slowly, as if the food reminded him of things he didn't know he'd missed. Afterward, he offered to do the dishes. She smiled but waved him off. "You just got back," she said.
Let me take care of you for once.
He looked up at her then, eyes filled with something unreadable, guilt, maybe, or longing. And as Martha stood by the sink, her hands in warm sudsy water, she let herself believe, just for a little while, that the long winter of her life had finally begun to thaw. The first week after Jason's return felt like something from a storybook. Martha, careful not to overwhelm him, gave him space but couldn't hide her joy. She set 2 plates at dinner again, not out of habit now, but with real purpose. She smiled more. Her steps were lighter. The creaking of the old floorboards no longer echoed as loudly in the evenings. Jason stayed in his old room, which had remained untouched. His childhood books still lined the shelves, a faded baseball cap hung on the doorknob, and on the nightstand, still sitting in the exact same spot, was a photo of the 2 of them from his high school graduation. The boy in the picture grinned confidently, arms slung around his mother's shoulders. She, beaming with pride, held his diploma like a trophy. He spent most mornings sleeping in. When he finally came down, Martha always had something warm waiting: pancakes, grits, or scrambled eggs, just like old times. He complimented her cooking, asked about the neighbors, even offered to help around the house. He changed the filters in the furnace, replaced a broken light fixture, and raked the last of the autumn leaves that clung stubbornly to the yard. Martha was grateful but cautious. There was a stillness in Jason that hadn't been there before. He smiled, yes, but often at the wrong times. His answers were vague when she asked about his recent years. He flinched once when she tried to touch his hand. And though he spoke of rebuilding, starting fresh, and wanting to stay close, something in his eyes remained guarded. Still, she did not question it. She was just happy to have him home. 2 weeks in, Jason suggested they take a drive into town. It had been years since he'd walked the familiar sidewalks of Echo Falls. The town hadn't changed much. Main Street still had the same diner, the same pharmacy, the same post office with the flagpole out front. The big difference now was Jason's presence. As they walked, people stared. Some with curiosity, others with skepticism. One by one, familiar faces stopped them. "Well, if it isn't Jason Ellison," said Mr. Thompson, the retired fire chief.
Back from the big city, ou?
Jason laughed politely. "Just visiting Mom for a while. Needed a break from the madness." "I'll bet," Mr. Thompson replied, narrowing his eyes.
Law of madness out there these days.
At the local coffee shop, Martha ran into Sarah Monroe, the community nurse who checked in on her monthly. Sarah, a woman in her 40s with sharp eyes and a kind voice, greeted Martha with genuine affection, but her gaze lingered on Jason.
"So," Sarah said, smiling tightly, "you're the prodigal son."
Jason chuckled. "I guess I am." Sarah tilted her head. "We haven't seen you around in quite some time. What brings you back now?"
Jason's smile faltered for a split second.
"Just needed a reset. Home's the only place that made sense." Sarah nodded but didn't respond. Something in her posture shifted, subtle but telling.
On the drive home, Jason Greauquier.
He stared out the window, tapping his fingers against the car door. "You okay?" Martha asked. "Yeah," he said after a pause. "Just, didn't expect everyone to be so nosy." "They're just surprised," Martha said gently. "It's been a while." "Yeah, I know." That night, Martha found him at the dining room table with his laptop open, papers spread around him. He was researching, scribbling notes, reading legal documents. "What are you working on?" she asked, bringing him a mug of cocoa. "Just looking into some health insurance stuff," he said casually.
Thinking ahead.
"You're not getting any younger, Mom." She raised an eyebrow but didn't question further. The next morning, Jason cooked breakfast for the first time since coming home. Pancakes, just slightly overcooked, with a side of turkey bacon. He placed the plates down with a proud smile. "Breakfast is served." Martha chuckled. "Trying to reclaim the kitchen, are you?" "Maybe. Figured you deserved a break." She sat down, noticing a little envelope at her place. Inside was a brochure for a premium health plan and a form for a life insurance policy. "What's this?" she asked. I've been thinking, he said, sitting across from her, his tone light but practiced. If something happens to you, God forbid, I should be prepared. You know how expensive funerals are these days. I'm not planning to go anywhere just yet, she said, trying to keep her voice steady. Of course not, he said quickly. This is just practical. It's what responsible families do. Martha looked down at the form. Her name already printed. A pen placed neatly beside it. Jason smiled. It's just a signature, Mom. I'll take care of the rest. She hesitated. A part of her wanted to refuse, but the warmth in his voice, the newfound tenderness, it disarmed her. She signed. After breakfast, Jason collected the documents and walked them to the study. He placed them in a folder, his face expressionless. Later that afternoon, he drove into town. Alone. Inside a small tucked-away insurance agency on Oak Street, he handed the folder to the agent behind the desk. She's the insured, he said, pointing to the form. I'm the beneficiary.
Standard coverage.
Term plan. I'd like it expedited. The agent scanned the documents, nodded, and assured him it could be processed quickly. When he returned home, Martha was knitting on the porch. He kissed her forehead. Just picking up groceries, he lied. That night, as they ate dinner, Jason watched her carefully. He listened to her stories about neighbors, her memories of his childhood. She laughed as she recalled how he used to hide peas in his pockets to avoid eating them.
Jason loguait tout.
But his eyes remained cold.
En så mer deep inside the walls of the house, something unseen shifted. The air grew stiller.
The floorboards creaked less. And the warmth of a mother's welcome began to settle into something else entirely, a quiet, invisible thread that, once pulled, would unravel everything. As December slid quietly into January, Echo Falls became blanketed in a soft hush of snow. The roads were dusted white each morning, and bare branches scraped lightly against frozen window panes. Inside the Ellison house, the warmth of the kitchen fire and the smell of cinnamon bread offered a comforting illusion that everything was just as it should be. But beneath the surface, things had begun to shift. Martha had started waking with dull headaches. Her energy waned by mid-afternoon, and she found herself needing naps she never used to take. The symptoms were subtle at first. Just fatigue, she told herself. A natural slowing down. But in quiet moments, she sensed something foreign curling within her. Jason, attentive as ever, noticed. He brought her tea in bed each morning, laid out her medication, insisted she eat only what he prepared. No more canned soup, he'd say with a laugh. Too much sodium. I read that's bad for older hearts. At first, Martha was touched by his concern. It was a tenderness she had longed for. But soon, the choices weren't offered anymore. They were made. He cleared out the pantry, replaced her tea leaves with herbal packets labeled in languages she couldn't read. Her daily pills were swapped with opaque capsules he called natural liver support. She asked where he got them. Imported, he said, smiling. High-grade stuff. Only the best for you, Mom. She nodded, trusting. Still, her stomach churned more often. Some mornings, she felt a sharp, twisting nausea, enough to send her back to bed without touching breakfast. Jason would sit beside her, stroking her hair. Just rest, he whispered. Let me take care of everything. He meant it. He started managing her mail, her finances. He unplugged the landline, saying it only carried spam. He said he would field any important calls himself. He signed her up for a new smart plan, with his own number as the only emergency contact.
Martha, foggy and slow, let it happen.
Sarah Monroe noticed the change during her monthly wellness visit. The nurse arrived with her usual bright scarf and clipboard, stamping snow off her boots at the door. "Hello, Ms. Martha," she called out, voice echoing in the hallway. Martha didn't answer. She was resting upstairs. Jason opened the door, his expression warm but firm. "She's been tired lately," he said. "Just a seasonal slump."
Sarah's eyes narrowed slightly.
"I'd still like to see her."
It's protocol.
Jason hesitated, then stepped aside. Upstairs, Martha sat on the edge of her bed, shoulders hunched. Her skin was pale, her cheeks sallow. Sarah examined her gently, taking her vitals and watching her carefully. "You've lost weight," Sarah noted, scribbling on her clipboard. Martha smiled faintly.
Just a light aptite. Any nausea?
Fatigue. Martha nodded slowly. But I'm just getting older. Do you mind if I look at your medication? Jason, hovering by the doorway, answered instead. They're all supplements.
Herbal.
I've got a friend in Portland who knows a guy that formulates them. Sarah turned to him, her expression unreadable. Could I see the labels?
Jason shrugged.
They're unbranded. Bulk order.
Sarah made a note.
That's not ideal. Especially for someone Martha's age.
Jason's smile stiffened.
I wouldn't give her anything dangerous. I didn't say you would, Sarah replied. Later that evening, after she had left, Jason paced the living room. He muttered to himself, eyes darting toward the door every few seconds. He pulled out his phone, sent a message, then deleted the thread. Martha, from the hallway, watched him. Is everything all right, sweetheart? She asked. He turned quickly, then softened his face. Of course. Just work stuff.
Go, reste.
She nodded, retreating. But something inside her stirred uneasily. It was the first time in weeks she felt truly awake. The next morning, Sarah returned unannounced. Jason was out running errands. Martha was sitting by the window, knitting, a blanket across her lap. I forgot to ask a few follow-up questions, Sarah said.
Mein Deficit.
Martha welcomed her gladly. The two women spoke quietly. Sarah asked questions Martha hadn't expected. Do you know where your medications come from?
Martha shook her head.
Do you feel pressured to stay in the house?
Martha hesitated.
Jason says it's not safe with all the ice.
Sarah leaned forward.
Would you trust me with one of the pills he gives you? I'd like to run a test.
Martha blinked, incertain.
But something about Sarah's voice, firm but kind, reached a part of her that had been buried. She nodded and pointed to a small pill organizer on the kitchen counter. Sarah slipped one capsule into a small plastic bag. Thank you, she said. That night, Jason returned home in high spirits. I got us movie passes, he said.
Just something light.
Maybe we go this weekend. Martha smiled but didn't speak much. Her hands trembled slightly as she reached for her tea. Jason noticed. You okay? I think. I'd like to visit Dr. Greer, she said.
Just for peace of mind. Jason's smile faltered. You don't need to go anywhere.
You have me. I know, she replied, but it's been a while. He stepped closer, gently touched her shoulder.
You don't trust me.
Her throat tightened. It's not that. But neither of them finished the sentence. Later that night, Jason stood in the darkened hallway, staring at his mother's door. Something cold settled behind his eyes. In her room, Martha held a letter from Sarah in her lap. Inside was a short note.
Hang in there. I'll be back soon. Don't take any more pill until we talk.
For the first time in days, Martha slipped into sleep without swallowing the bitter capsule. And outside, the wind howled softly across the fields of Echo Falls. 3 days passed before Sarah received the lab results. She had driven 2 towns over to a friend at a private clinic in Jefferson City, someone who owed her a favor and agreed to run the sample discreetly. It was mid-afternoon when her phone buzzed with the email notification. She pulled over on the side of Route 17, heart beating hard against her ribs. The winter wind rocked the car gently, and her breath fogged the windshield. The report was simple. Cold. Scientific. Compound detected, N-dimethylacetamide derivative. Known hepatic toxin. Not approved for human consumption. Prolonged ingestion may result in irreversible liver damage. Sarah reread it twice, then closed her eyes. Her fingers tightened around the steering wheel. She knew the signs. Fatigue. Nausea. Weakness. They weren't just signs of aging. They were symptoms of poisoning.
A deliberate poisoning.
She reached for her phone, then paused. Calling the police meant escalation. There would be questions, paperwork, legal walls she might not be able to climb. Jason was intelligent, charismatic, and manipulative. If he caught wind of her suspicions too early, he could vanish, or worse, accelerate whatever plan he had set in motion. She made one call.
Sheriff Tom Jacobs.
Tom had known Sarah since high school. They weren't close, but they respected each other, two lifers in a town that rarely changed. His voice on the other end was calm. "You sure about this?" he asked after she explained. "I have evidence," she said. "Enough to start an inquiry." He exhaled. "I'll meet you at the station.
Tonight.
Quietly. Back in Echo Falls, Martha sat in her living room armchair, watching the fireplace. Her eyes were glassy. In her lap was a knitted blanket she hadn't touched in hours. Jason had gone out that morning, claiming he needed to get a few things sorted in town. She hadn't asked questions. But something inside her stirred. A whisper of instinct, old and maternal. It reminded her of nights when Jason was a boy and tried to hide broken toys or poor grades. The guilt in his voice had always betrayed him, even when his words sounded sweet. She had told herself it was just his stress. But the whispers were growing louder. That evening, she stood slowly and walked to the kitchen. The pill organizer was still on the counter. She opened the compartment marked Thursday and stared at the capsule inside. It was the same color. Same shape.
Smooth, tout perfect.
She picked it up, held it under the light, then placed it gently in a tissue and hid it inside her sewing box. Later that night, Jason returned. His mood was different. Forced. Tense. "I brought groceries," he said, holding up a bag. "Thought we'd try that stew you used to make." Martha smiled faintly.
"That's kind of you."
Jason busied himself in the kitchen. He diced vegetables, measured spices, and simmered broth like a man trying to play the part of someone else. He watched Martha closely from the corner of his eye. At dinner, she picked at her food.
Jason fillette the silence.
"You know, I've been thinking," he began. "Maybe we should update your will. I mean, just in case." Martha looked up, her fork halfway to her mouth. "You're not dying," he added quickly, chuckling. "But it's smart. Everyone should have a plan. A power of attorney. That kind of thing." She didn't answer right away. She stared into his face, trying to recognize her son in the man sitting across the table. His eyes met hers, calm, confident, but something behind them felt hollow. "I'll think about it," she said softly. Jason smiled. "Of course.
No pressure."
In the sheriff's office that same evening, Tom Jacobs sat with Sarah in his private office, blinds drawn. She handed him the lab report and a brief written statement. He read it silently, jaw tightening as he flipped through each page. "This is serious," he muttered. "I know. If we act, we'll need to document every step. Interviews.
Chain of evidence.
We need to be sure." Sarah nodded. "Then start with her. Quietly. Just enough to confirm she's in danger." Tom tapped a pen against his desk, thinking. "Do you trust her to speak openly?"
Sarah hésita-t-elle.
"I think she wants to. But she's scared. Or maybe she's in denial." Tom leaned back in his chair.
Let me handle it. The next morning, Tom visited the Ellison house under the pretense of a welfare check.
Martha answered the door, her face tired but composed. "Morning, Miss Ellison," he said, tipping his hat. "Just making the rounds. Cold snaps got folks worried." She stepped aside.
Come in, Sheriff.
Inside, the air smelled of cinnamon and something chemical, cleanser maybe. Jason wasn't home. Tom made small talk for a while. Asked about her health. The house. The weather. Then he leaned forward. "Miss Martha," he said gently, "I'm going to ask you something difficult."
I need you to be honest with me.
She stilled. "Has anyone been giving you medications you don't recognize?" Martha's throat tightened. Her hands, folded in her lap, began to tremble. He waited. Finally, she nodded. "Just once. I stopped taking them 2 nights ago," she whispered. "I didn't tell him. I hid them." Tom kept his voice steady. "Would you be willing to give us a sample?" "Yes." "What about the insurance? The documents you signed?" She looked away, ashamed. "He said it was for my protection."
Tom exhaled slowly. You did nothing wrong.
Martha didn't cry. But when she handed over the pill wrapped in tissue, her fingers brushed Tom's, and he felt the weight of her silence. Back at the station, the pill was logged into evidence. Sarah contacted the lab again to cross-confirm the sample. Tom began compiling a timeline: Jason's arrival, the symptoms, the paperwork, the sudden control over daily life. By evening, a quiet storm had begun to form, legal, moral, human. Jason returned home at dusk. He found Martha sitting by the fireplace, knitting again. "You okay?" he asked. She looked up, smiled faintly.
Never better.
He kissed her on the forehead. "You're strong, Mom. Always have been." But as he walked past her, toward the kitchen, Martha whispered to herself under her breath.
"So are you.
Just not in the way I hoped." Jason had always believed himself to be in control. He had watched enough people, bosses, creditors, investors, fall for the illusion of charm and confidence. His ability to mold reality had gotten him out of lawsuits, late rent, and at least 2 serious debts. But here, in the stillness of his childhood home, something was shifting beneath his feet. It was subtle at first. Martha no longer waited for him to brew the morning tea. She rose before him and returned to her old habits: black coffee, 1 piece of toast, no pills. She said little, but her eyes watched him more closely than before. Jason noticed the small things. The sewing box moved from its usual place.
A notepad on the side table with page missing.
A new mail key on her nightstand, the old one had been in his coat pocket. And more than once, he caught her watching him with an expression he couldn't read. One evening, as he was preparing dinner, he heard the creak of the floor above. Martha was in her room, alone. He climbed the stairs quietly, listening. Her voice drifted from behind the door, low, measured, firm. "I understand," she was saying. "Yes."
Yelel Biredi.
Jason froze. The floorboard groaned beneath his foot, and the voice stopped.
Et knoquedons.
"Mom?"
Everything okay?
A pause. Then, "Just a friend on the phone." He opened the door without waiting. Martha sat in her chair, a book on her lap. The phone was tucked beneath a cushion. She looked up calmly. "Do you need something?" she asked. Jason smiled.
Just checking on you.
She nodded. "I'm fine." But that night, as he lay awake staring at the ceiling, Jason began to sweat. Something was wrong.
Too many little things.
Too many questions hanging like fog above the breakfast table. The next morning, he drove 2 hours to a contact he hadn't seen in years, a man named Craig who dealt in forged documents and clean exits. They met at a rest stop off the highway, beneath the pretense of a coffee catch-up. "I need to move some things," Jason said. "Clean and fast." Craig narrowed his eyes.
You in trouble?
"Not yet," Jason replied. "But I will be if I wait." Craig leaned in.
Insurance money.
Jason didn't answer. He didn't have to. "I can get you out," Craig said. "But it'll cost you."
You get the payout, you wire it in pièces. Yelel handle the rest.
Jason nodded. Back in Echo Falls, Sheriff Tom Jacobs reviewed the findings from the lab. The second sample Martha had provided was identical to the first, an unregulated compound with known toxicity. Combined with the signed insurance policy, the complete control over her medication, and Martha's own testimony, they had enough for a warrant. But Tom hesitated.
What is the hold-up?
Sarah asked when she stopped by the station that afternoon. "I don't want to mess this up," Tom said. "One wrong step, and he'll run." Sarah nodded. "Then let me talk to her again. Make sure she's ready." That evening, Sarah visited Martha just before dusk. Jason was out again, supposedly at the store. They sat in the kitchen, where sunlight fell in long gold streaks across the counter. "I know what he's doing," Martha said without preamble. Sarah reached across the table. "Are you sure you're ready to testify?" "I raised him," Martha said. "I fed him with my hands. Dressed him. Sang to him when he was sick. If he thinks he can take my life like I'm some old problem to erase." Her voice cracked, but her eyes did not waver. "I'll do what needs to be done."
Sarah exhaled slowly.
"Then we move tomorrow." Jason returned home to find Martha preparing soup. He paused in the doorway, watching her stir the pot. "You didn't have to do that," he said. I wanted to, she replied, not turning around. He stepped closer. Mom, do you feel like something's changed? She turned then, meeting his gaze. Should something have? He searched her face. For guilt.
For weakness.
For fear. But found none. You know I love you, he said suddenly, almost childlike. She smiled sadly.
I believe you think you do.
Jason took a breath, turned away, and left the room. That night, he packed a small bag. Just essentials, cash, ID, burner phone. He kept it under the bed. But morning came with snow. And with the snow came headlights outside the house. 2 cars. Unmarked.
Jason saw them from the upstairs window.
In an instant, his calm shattered. He grabbed the bag, shoved it under his coat, and bolted down the stairs. But as he reached the front door, it opened. Tom Jacobs stepped in, hand resting casually near his hip. Behind him, another officer. Morning, Jason, Tom said. Mind if we have a word? Jason froze. About what? He asked, voice tight. Just a few things. You can sit. Or we can do it at the station. Jason looked past him, down the road.
Snow fell softly, mutin the world.
He dropped the bag. I'll sit, he said. Martha, from the top of the stairs, watched silently. Jason did not meet her eyes. Jason sat in the metal chair with his hands folded in front of him. The small windowless room inside the Echo Falls Sheriff Station was cold. Too cold. But he didn't ask for a coat. Didn't ask for coffee. He sat in silence, eyes fixed on the chipped edge of the table, counting the seconds in his head like a man waiting for a train he couldn't stop. Sheriff Tom Jacobs entered with a file folder in hand. He didn't slam it down. He didn't raise his voice. He simply sat across from Jason, opened the folder, and placed a sheet of paper between them. This is a lab report, Tom began. It details the contents of the pills you've been giving your mother. Jason didn't look up. Tom continued, voice steady. They're toxic. Illegal. Prolonged use damages the liver. We tested 2 samples. Both match. Jason exhaled through his nose but said nothing.
Tom slid another paper forward.
This is a copy of the life insurance policy you filed. Your mother's name is listed as the insured. You're the sole beneficiary. Signed 1 month ago. Jason finally looked up. She agreed to it. Did she know the full terms? She's not a child, Jason said sharply. She can read. Tom leaned back.
She also trusted you.
That complicates things.
There was silence again.
Then Tom asked quietly, why Jason? Jason's mouth twitched. I needed the money. That's simple. No, Jason said, eyes darkening. Nothing is ever that simple. Tom waited. Jason sat back in his chair, jaw tightening.
You know what happened when you fell out there?
When your business tanks. When you owe people who don't wait for court orders to get their money back. He laughed bitterly. Everyone disappears. Friends. Investors. The same people who used to praise me, ask for favors, gone. I was alone. Broke. Desperate. And then I remembered something. Tom raised an eyebrow. What?
My mother never stopped loving. No matter what. The warden in the air like smoke.
I told myself I'd just use the money to start over, Jason went on.
Build something better.
Safer. And then I'd come back. Visit her grave.
Plant flowers. Do something good.
Tom said nothing for a long time.
You poisoned your own mother, Jason.
Slowly. Deliberately.
Do you hear yourself?
Jason looked away. You think I don't know that? Then why didn't you stop? Jason's voice dropped to a whisper. Because it was working.
Tom exhaled slowly.
We have enough to charge you with attempted murder. Fraud. Maybe more. Jason nodded once. I know. Back at the Ellison house, Martha sat on the porch wrapped in a thick shawl. Sarah stood beside her, both women watching the gray clouds gather above the bare trees.
You were brave, Sarah said softly.
I feel like a fool, Martha replied. No, Sarah said firmly.
You were a mother.
Martha nodded, but tears welled in her eyes.
Ich should have known.
I should have seen it sooner. You saw what you wanted to see. We all do. A pause. Do you hate him? Sarah asked. Martha didn't answer at first. She looked out at the road where Jason had been taken just hours before. No, she said quietly. But I don't think I can love him the same way anymore. The next morning, Jason was transferred to the county detention center. There was no press, no headlines. Echo Falls was small, and the sheriff's department wanted to keep things quiet until charges were formally announced. Tom visited Martha once more before finalizing the report. He brought her a copy of the affidavit and an envelope containing information about victims' rights and support services. I don't need a support group, she said gently. But thank you. Tom hesitated, then asked, would you want to speak with him?
Before things move forward.
Martha looked down at her hands. They were trembling again, the way they had that first day he returned. Yes, she said. I think I need to. 2 days later, under supervision, Martha was escorted into the visiting room at the county jail. Jason was already seated behind the glass, his face pale, unshaven. He looked smaller. Not physically, but in presence. As if something vital had been stripped from him. When Martha entered, he stood. Mom, he said, voice catching. She sat down slowly, lifted the phone receiver. Jason did the same. For a long moment, they just stared at each other. I don't know what to say, he whispered. You don't have to say anything, she replied. I'm sorry, he said quickly. I know it doesn't matter now, but I
believe you were sorry, Martha interrupted.
But I also believe you made every choice with your eyes open. Jason's eyes filled with tears. I told myself I was doing it for a good reason. That it wasn't really hurting you. That it was just a shortcut. There are no shortcuts, Martha said softly.
Only consequences.
He nodded, unable to speak. She continued, I raised you to be kind. To work hard. To never lie. I know, he said.
Irremembé.
You broke every one of those. I don't deserve forgiveness. Martha looked at him for a long time, then said no. But I might give it to you anyway. One day. Not today. Jason bowed his head. A tear slid down his cheek. I'll survive, Martha said quietly. But I won't forget. Jason nodded slowly, lips trembling. She rose to leave. Mom, he started. But she had already hung up the receiver. Jason's world had shrunk to 12 feet by 8. The walls of the cell were concrete, painted an institutional gray that seemed to absorb light. There was a cot, a steel sink, and a toilet bolted to the floor. No privacy. No space to think without hearing someone else's grief pressed against the walls. The first week, he said nothing. He ate what was given to him, kept his head down, and didn't speak unless spoken to. The guards noted his silence. The other inmates, most of whom had seen worse men fall apart faster, didn't bother him. He didn't sleep much. When the lights went out, Jason lay on his back, staring at the ceiling. The dark had its own voice here, whispers, sobs, muttered prayers from other cells. But none were louder than his own thoughts. He kept hearing her voice. I raised you to be kind. He'd repeat it, over and over like a litany, hoping that saying the words would one day make them true again. Back in Echo Falls, Martha returned to her routines, but everything felt different now. The house, once filled with the familiar rhythm of daily life, now echoed like a hollow shell. She swept the kitchen not out of necessity but habit. She cooked simple meals and left half of them untouched. She kept Jason's room exactly as it was, bedsheets still unwashed, a book still lying open on the nightstand. But she no longer looked for his footsteps in the hallway. Some mornings, she would walk into the room and sit for a few minutes. Not to cry. Not to reminisce. Just to remind herself that it had all been real. That the boy she had raised and the man who had tried to end her life were the same person. She couldn't reconcile them. She had stopped trying. One Wednesday afternoon, a letter arrived. The envelope was thin, no return address. She recognized the handwriting instantly. Still the same, though shakier now. Martha sat at the table and unfolded the single page. Mom, I don't expect you to read this. I wouldn't blame you if you threw it away. But if you do read it, I want you to know that I see everything clearly now. Not just what I did, but who I became. I didn't turn into someone else overnight. It happened inch by inch, every time I chose myself over someone else. Every time I justified something ugly because I called it survival. You didn't deserve what I did to you. And still, you sat across from me and told me you might forgive me one day. I don't know how. I write this not to ask for anything. I don't deserve your kindness. I only want to say that if I ever find a way to become a better man, it'll be because you taught me how to be one.
And because I remember. I remember the way you used to hold my hand when I was sick.
I remember your laugh when I told you bad jokes. I remember you waking up early every day for 20 years just to make sure I had something warm to eat. I remember that version of me who loved you. I still carry him, somewhere. I'm sorry. Jason. Martha read it once. Then again. Her hands didn't tremble. She didn't weep. But she folded the letter carefully, placed it inside her Bible, and closed the book without a word. The next day, she visited Sarah Monroe. I want to help, Martha said simply. Whatever you're building, I want in. Sarah blinked, surprised. You mean the kitchen project? Yes. You mentioned needing a space. Equipment. I have both.
Sarah hesitated.
Are you sure? No, Martha said with a small smile. But I need to do something with the pieces of what's left. And I think that house, this house, should be filled with life again. They started with the kitchen. Old pots and pans were cleaned. Cabinets rearranged. The old wooden table, scored with years of knife marks and flour dust, was sanded down and oiled. Sarah brought donated ingredients from the community center. The church lent aprons. The local school helped spread the word. Within 2 weeks, a new sound filled the Ellison house, laughter. Children from the neighborhood came every Saturday. Some were from foster care, others from single-parent homes, a few just in need of a place to belong. They learned to measure sugar, to crack eggs without shells, to knead dough until their small arms ached. Martha taught them how to braid challah bread. How to taste the difference between sea salt and table salt.
How to listen. To the beblin of a pot, to the key between word.
One boy, Liam, lingered after class one afternoon. He was 9.
Shy.
A little awkward. Miss Martha? He asked.
Yes, sweetheart.
Was your son really bad? Martha paused. Then knelt so she could look him in the eyes. He made a lot of bad choices, she said. But once, he was just a boy like you. He used to help me stir pancake batter every Sunday. Liam nodded.
Help my grandma.
She says I have gentle hands. Martha smiled. Then you already have something important.
Don't lose that.
That night, when the last child had gone, and the house was quiet again, Martha stood in the kitchen alone. The scent of cinnamon and vanilla lingered in the air. She looked around, the clean counters, the empty bowls, the flour on the floor. And for the first time in months, she felt peace.
No tilling.
Not yet. But the kind of stillness that comes after a storm, when you know the worst has passed and there's nothing left to do but begin again. Martha had just finished stacking the last of the clean mixing bowls when the phone rang. It was late, well past dark, and she nearly ignored it. But something made her wipe her hands on her apron and pick it up. Mrs. Ellison, came the voice on the line. This is Anna Pearson from the district attorney's office. Martha felt her back straighten. Yes, she said quietly.
I'm listening.
Anna was polite, cautious, and respectful. She explained that the case had stirred interest at the state level. Though the trial had concluded and Jason was serving his sentence, the DA's office was working on a public awareness campaign about elder abuse and financial exploitation. We believe your story, your experience, could help others, Anna said. You're under no obligation. But we'd be honored if you'd speak publicly. A short video.
Mais bon interview.
You can choose the format. Martha didn't respond right away. I'll think about it, she said, her voice steady. After the call ended, she stood in the kitchen for a long while, staring at the window.
Outside, the trees swayed gently, casting long shadow against the snowy ground.
The idea of sharing her story made her uneasy. Not because of shame, she had worked past that, but because it would mean speaking his name again. Not to a judge.
Not to the mirror.
But to strangers.
To the world.
And yet, she couldn't deny something deeper, a pull to make meaning out of the pain. To offer more than silence. That night, she dreamed of Jason, not the man he had become, but the boy he once was. He was 10, holding her hand at the county fair, cotton candy sticking to his cheeks. He was laughing. So was she. She woke up with tears on her pillow. The next morning, she called Anna back. "I'll do it," she said. "But I won't speak as a victim. I'll speak as a mother." 3 weeks later, the video was filmed in her living room. The camera crew was small. A director, a sound technician, and Anna, who sat just off camera, guiding her with gentle questions. Martha wore a soft blue cardigan, the same one she had worn to Jason's high school graduation. She didn't use a script. She spoke from memory. "There were moments," she said, looking into the lens, "when I convinced myself that love meant trust without limits. That because I was his mother, I couldn't believe he would ever harm me. And by the time I realized something was wrong, I was already so far into the dark that I couldn't tell if it was day or night." She paused. Swallowed hard. "But I also believe people don't turn into monsters overnight. My son didn't. He fell by inches.
Small choice. Small compromise.
Until he was someone I couldn't recognize. And I stayed silent, thinking that if I loved him hard enough, I could bring him back."
Another pause.
"I still love him," she said finally. "I probably always will. But love doesn't mean closing your eyes. It means seeing clearly and choosing what's right anyway." When the video aired on the DA's website and was shared across state advocacy groups, it was met with silence first. Then tears. Then conversation. Letters came in. Some handwritten, some typed. "A retired teacher from Minnesota, your strength gave me the courage to tell my sister about my son." A widower from Oregon, "I thought I was the only one whose children saw me as a burden."
You made me feel less alone.
Sarah brought a stack of letters to Martha every week. They read some together over coffee, sometimes laughing, sometimes crying. Meanwhile, in the county detention center, Jason had begun to write. It started as a request by the prison counselor, journaling as part of a rehabilitation program.
Jason resisted at first.
He had nothing to say, he insisted. Nothing that hadn't already been said in court or apology letters. But eventually, one sleepless night, he picked up the pen. He wrote about the first time he saw his mother cry, after the power was shut off in their house when he was 8. He wrote about his first lie to her, faking a fever to skip school. He wrote about ambition, failure, hunger for validation. And he wrote about the pills. The calculated way he had measured her decline, like a ledger balancing debt and outcome. There was no poetry in it.
No self-pity.
Just fact. And in its rawness, there was an honesty he hadn't known he was capable of. The counselor read one entry and suggested he submit it to the prison's literary journal, a small publication distributed among state facilities. It was accepted. Titled Ledger of Loss, the essay circulated quietly, but it caught the attention of a professor from a local university who taught courses in ethics and criminal psychology. The professor wrote Jason a letter. "Your reflection," he wrote, "is not an exoneration, but it is a beginning." Jason folded the letter carefully and placed it inside a worn paperback of East of Eden, a book his mother had once read to him when he was 12. That night, for the first time since his arrest, Jason allowed himself to hope, not for freedom, not for forgiveness, but for the chance to leave behind something more than ruin. And back in Echo Falls, as spring approached and the snow began to melt, Martha found herself humming in the kitchen again. She baked loaves of bread with the children. She opened the windows. She replanted the herb garden she'd neglected for 2 years. The past was still there, etched into the walls of the house and the folds of her heart, but it no longer owned her. She had spoken. She had been heard. And in the silence that followed, something resembling healing had begun to bloom. By mid-April, Echo Falls was no longer buried in snow. The town was waking slowly, as if unsure whether to believe in warmth again. Daffodils sprouted along the church fences. The local market reintroduced strawberries that tasted faintly of sun. And in the back of the Ellison house, the old herb garden that Martha once neglected was now green with purpose. Inside the house, children gathered again for Saturday's cooking class. Flour dusted the air, the counters, the sleeves of small shirts. Martha moved through the kitchen like she belonged there, not just as a teacher but as a keeper of something soft and steady in the world. That afternoon, Sarah entered with a manila envelope and a paper-clipped stack. "They're holding a town meeting," she said, "and they want you to speak." Martha wiped her hands. "About Jason?"
Sarah hésita-t-elle.
"About elder protection. About the awareness campaign. About how it happened."
Martha exhalait.
"Do they still whisper his name like a scandal?" Sarah looked away. "Some do. But not in the way they used to. People understand now. They just don't know how to talk about it." Martha nodded slowly. "Maybe it's time I teach them," she said. The town meeting was held in the same gymnasium where Jason once received his academic awards. Folding chairs lined the waxed floor, and a blue banner hung across the stage, "Community Safety for Our Seniors, a Conversation." Martha stood behind the podium in a charcoal shawl, her hair pinned neatly. She looked out at familiar faces, neighbors who had eaten her pies, teachers who had once praised Jason, even Mrs. Dalton, who had sent Jason a graduation card with a $50 bill tucked inside. "I never imagined I'd be here," she began, her voice calm, speaking about what happened not in private, but in a room full of witnesses. A hush fell over the room. "When my son returned home, I saw only the child I remembered. The boy who once cried when he broke my teacup. I didn't see the man who had changed, who was desperate enough to hurt someone he loved." She paused.
That's the thing about love.
"It blinds us sometimes. Not because it's weak, but because it's strong enough to hope, even when it shouldn't." There were a few murmurs. Some eyes dropped. Others stayed locked on her, unblinking. "I didn't come here to ask for pity," she said. "I came to say that we can't be afraid to ask hard questions, of our children, of our neighbors, of ourselves." The applause came not in a roar, but a slow growing wave, one that carried something more than approval.
It carried understanding.
Back at the county correctional facility, Jason was transferred to the rehabilitation unit. The change wasn't due to good behavior alone. His writing had caught the attention of the staff and even a university ethics professor, who suggested Jason begin mentoring young offenders through writing. At first, Jason refused. "What could I possibly teach anyone?" he asked the prison counselor. "You can teach them how to tell the truth," she replied. The program was informal, 8 inmates between the ages of 18 and 25. They met in a multipurpose room with cheap pens and yellow legal pads. Jason sat at the head of the table, his posture uncertain, like a man standing on a floor he wasn't sure would hold. He didn't give lectures. He just read aloud. "My mother used to say," he began, "that the kitchen was where all truth came out. Burnt food meant she was worried. A clean floor meant she was angry. A hot meal meant she still believed in something." The room stayed quiet. "You write what's real," Jason told them. "No excuses. No lies. Even if it makes you look like the villain." That day Malik, a 19-year-old who barely spoke, wrote 5 lines about the night he was arrested. Not about the crime, but about the look on his little sister's face as the police took him away. It was raw. It was rough. But it was honest. In the weeks that followed, more stories emerged. Some were heartbreaking. Some were just confused. But each time someone wrote something true, Jason saw a piece of his former self, just a kid trying to explain the unexplainable. One afternoon, the counselor handed Jason an envelope. It was a letter from a reader of the prison literary journal, responding to his latest piece. It read, "Your story isn't an excuse. But it's a light. Some of us live in shadows of shame too. Thank you for saying the things we've been too afraid to say." Jason folded the letter and placed it inside his worn copy of East of Eden. Then he picked up his pen and began a new page. Meanwhile, Martha received a package by mail. No return address, but the handwriting was unmistakable. Inside was a small bundle wrapped in brown paper. She opened it slowly. It was a pen. Not expensive. Not engraved. Just a simple fountain pen with a wooden handle, polished and smooth. There was a note. "I thought it was time I wrote with something that didn't erase so easily." Martha stared at the pen for a long time. Then she walked to the kitchen drawer where she kept her old recipe cards. She pulled out the one labeled banana walnut loaf, and copied it by hand, using the new pen, onto a clean card. When she finished, she smiled. Not because the pen worked beautifully, but because the handwriting was firm. Certain. Some truths didn't need forgiveness to move forward. They only needed to be written down. Summer settled over Echo Falls with a kind of softness that made everything seem new again. The days stretched longer, the breeze through the trees was warmer, and the garden behind Martha's house burst into life with basil, rosemary, and a stubborn little fig tree that hadn't borne fruit in years. In the kitchen, the Saturday cooking class continued. The children were getting better. They no longer cracked eggs with abandon or salted everything twice. They joked, they helped each other, they fought over who got to stir the batter. The house rang with laughter, the kind that soaked into the walls and stayed there. One Saturday, after the children had left and the last loaf of bread had cooled, Martha found herself standing alone in the kitchen, wiping her hands on the apron. She paused, staring at the windowsill where Jason's childhood photo still sat, a picture of him grinning, his front tooth missing, flour on his nose from helping her bake his 5th birthday cake. She didn't cry. Instead, she picked up the photo and brought it to her writing desk. Then she took out the fountain pen he'd sent her, the one with the simple wooden handle, and began to write. It was not a letter. It was not addressed to him. It was a journal entry. For her.
You were good.
Then you were not. But you were mine. And I have to believe that counts for something.
Not everything.
But something. When she finished, she closed the notebook and opened the window. The summer air carried in the scent of baked banana bread and newly mowed grass. It smelled like peace.
Not forgiven.
But peace. In the correctional facility, Jason's days had fallen into a rhythm. Wake. Shower.
Breakfast.
Writing workshop. It had been 4 months since he began mentoring the younger inmates. Some of them had already transferred out. Some had reoffended and returned. A few had asked Jason to write letters to their families, helping them find the right words. But Jason's most personal writing remained unpublished. He called it The Room with No Locks. It wasn't a novel. It wasn't a memoir. It was a meditation, a series of entries that examined one question from every angle: what makes someone betray the person who loved the most? Each page held a variation of the answer. Fear. Desperation.
Pride.
Shame. But never blame. I wasn't born a monster, he wrote. I just got tired of feeling like a failure. And instead of asking for help, I tried to rewrite the ending. Not with a confession, but with control. It was, in some ways, the most honest thing he'd ever written. The prison counselor asked if he wanted to submit it for publication. Jason shook his head. Not yet, he said. Some stories need more time. In August, Martha received a call from a university professor who had read one of Jason's published essays. The professor was developing a new curriculum on restorative justice and hoped to include a case study based on Jason's work and Martha's public advocacy. Would you be willing to speak to my students? The professor asked. Martha hesitated. She had spoken publicly before, but always for awareness, never in the context of higher education or philosophy. I'm not a teacher, she said. The professor replied, you lived something that none of us can teach from books. 2 weeks later, Martha stood in a lecture hall in front of 50 college students. She wore a navy blue blouse and no makeup. She didn't bring a slideshow or bullet points. She brought a loaf of bread. This is banana walnut, she said, placing it on the front desk. My son loved it when he was little. He used to say it tasted like hugs. The students laughed quietly. Then Martha said, he tried to kill me for insurance money.
Silence.
But before that, she continued, he kissed my cheek every night. He called me his hero. He helped me carry groceries and cried when he saw me sad. A student in the front row raised his hand. Do you believe he's changed? I believe he's trying, she said. Another student asked, do you forgive him? Martha looked down at the loaf of bread. I don't think forgiveness is a gift you give all at once. It's a practice. Like kneading dough. You have to keep pressing, folding, waiting. Some days it rises. Some days it doesn't. Later, as students passed around slices of the bread, Martha watched their expressions. The way they chewed slower. The way they glanced at each other without speaking. She realized then that learning didn't always happen in answers, it happened in pause. That night, back at home, Martha received a letter from Jason. It was shorter than usual. Mom. Today, I sat across from a young man who said he'd never met anyone who believed in second chances. I told him about you. I didn't say your name. I just said, there was a woman who believed that even broken things can be used again, maybe not in the way they were first meant to, but in a way that still matters. I hope that's true. Yours, J. Martha placed the letter in her notebook, tucked between the pages of her own journal entry. Then she turned off the lamp and went to bed. She dreamed of a kitchen full of children, all baking something warm. In the background, Jason, young, freckled, was laughing, holding up a loaf like a trophy. She didn't walk to him. She let the moment stay as it was. Whole. Some stories don't end with redemption. They end with motion, with people walking, writing, teaching, baking. With sons in prison who learn to speak honestly. With mothers who choose to live forward, not in spite of their grief, but because of it. And in a small house in Echo Falls, the oven keeps warming, the garden keeps growing, and the world keeps turning, not toward forgetting, but toward remembering better.